Ladies and gentlemen, today, we gather to discuss a place that has captured the world's attention, a facility designed to hold the most dangerous criminals, a fortress of discipline, and a symbol of law enforcement's determination to end organized crime. I am talking about CECOT, the most secure prison ever built. Situated in a country that has long struggled with violent crime, CECOT was not just a necessity, it was a statement. Built to house thousands of inmates, this facility is unlike any other. Every corner, every corridor, and every wall serves one purpose, ensuring that those inside can never pose a threat to society again. Security here is beyond imagination. Armed guards, high-tech surveillance, biometric checkpoints. Every measure ensures that escape is impossible. Inmates, many of whom were once part of the most feared criminal organizations, now live under constant watch, with zero contact with the outside world. The prison has played a critical role in reducing crime. The streets that were once controlled by fear have seen an unprecedented drop in violence. Many hail this as a victory, proof that strong action leads to results. But not everyone agrees. Human rights groups question the conditions inside, raising concerns about due process, rehabilitation, and the long-term effects of such extreme incarceration policies. What does CECOT mean for the future of crime prevention? Can such high-security facilities truly break the cycle of violence, or do they risk becoming symbols of a justice system that prioritizes punishment over rehabilitation? One thing is certain, CECOT is more than just a prison. It is a turning point in how nations handle crime, and the world is watching. In the history of crime and punishment, prisons have always played a crucial role in ensuring law and order. They serve as places of confinement, deterrence, and, ideally, rehabilitation. But in some parts of the world, where crime syndicates and violent gangs have grown beyond control, traditional prisons have often failed to contain the chaos. Today, we will discuss a facility that represents the extreme end of security measures, a prison designed to hold the most dangerous individuals, one that has captured global attention for its unprecedented scale and strict measures. This is CECOT, widely regarded as the world's most secure prison. CECOT was not built as an ordinary correctional facility. It was designed as a fortress, a symbol of absolute control, and a response to a criminal crisis that had plagued its nation for decades. This prison was not just meant to house criminals, it was meant to end an era of fear, where gangs operated with near impunity, controlling entire neighborhoods and threatening the fabric of society. With criminal organizations growing in power, something drastic needed to be done, and the response was the construction of a facility that left no room for error, weakness, or escape. This prison is a testament to how far governments are willing to go when faced with an existential crisis in public security. Unlike conventional facilities that allow for controlled movements, communication, and sometimes even social reintegration programs, CECOT is a place where every aspect of an inmate's life is dictated by the highest level of surveillance and restriction. There is no leniency, no second chances, only absolute confinement. The decision to build such a prison was not made lightly. It required enormous financial investment, intense political backing, and the restructuring of law enforcement strategies. More importantly, it required a commitment to a level of incarceration that many in the world had never seen before. When this facility was unveiled, it sent a clear message. Crime would no longer be tolerated, and the most dangerous elements of society would be locked away indefinitely, with no possibility of influencing the world outside. This brings us to an essential question. How did the world arrive at a point where such a prison was deemed necessary? The answer lies in years of violence, corruption, and a growing criminal empire that had resisted every previous attempt to be dismantled. Authorities had tried different measures before, from mass arrests to enhanced policing, but nothing seemed to break the cycle. Prisons in the past had only become recruitment centers for gangs, where inmates continued running criminal operations from behind bars. Something had to change, and CECOT was that change. This prison is not just a place of incarceration. It is a fortress built to ensure that the individuals inside never regain the power they once had. It is a controlled environment where order is absolute, and any attempt at defiance is met with swift consequences. Every aspect of its design, from the heavily monitored corridors to the strict routines enforced upon its inmates, reflects a vision of total security, one that some see as necessary while others see as excessive. With that, let us explore further what makes this facility the most secure in the world, what it holds within its walls, and what its existence means for the future of criminal justice. 2. Location and purpose. CECOT, the world's most secure prison, was not built randomly. Its location was strategically chosen to serve both security and psychological purposes. Situated in a remote area, far from densely populated cities and civilian infrastructure, this facility is isolated by design. Its distance from major urban centers minimizes any risk of external interference, escape attempts, or coordinated attacks from criminal organizations attempting to free their members. This remoteness also ensures that the prison operates as a completely self-contained world, where the only reality for those inside is one of strict confinement. The geography surrounding CECOT plays a significant role in its security. Built in an area that is difficult to access, the natural landscape itself serves as an additional layer of defense. Whether it be dense forests, rugged terrain, or a carefully planned buffer zone monitored by law enforcement, every environmental factor was considered when selecting this location. The government wanted to ensure that even in the highly unlikely event of a security breach, escape would be nearly impossible. Beyond the physical location, CECOT was constructed with a clear and resolute purpose: to permanently incapacitate the most dangerous criminals and dismantle organized crime networks. This was not meant to be a standard correctional facility with rehabilitation programs, education initiatives, or reintegration plans. Instead, it was envisioned as a final destination for those who had caused untold suffering through violence, extortion, and other serious crimes. For years, the country where CECOT was built struggled with one of the highest crime rates in the world. Criminal organizations had established strongholds within cities, controlling entire neighborhoods, extorting businesses, and recruiting young individuals into their ranks. The law enforcement system had been overwhelmed, and traditional prisons had become breeding grounds for further criminal activity. Inmates often continued to operate from behind bars, coordinating illegal activities through smuggled cell phones and corrupt prison staff. It became clear that existing methods of containment were not enough. Something had to change, something drastic. Thus, the purpose of CECOT was not just to imprison criminals, but to eliminate their influence entirely. The facility was designed to ensure absolute isolation from the outside world. No communication with family members, no visits, no opportunities to continue criminal enterprises from within. Once inside, inmates are effectively erased from society. This extreme level of control was meant to cut off any possibility of gang leaders directing operations, recruiting new members, or instilling fear among citizens from within prison walls. Another critical purpose of CECOT was to send a powerful message, not just to criminals, but to the entire country and the world. The construction of this facility was a declaration that the government would no longer tolerate crime at the levels it once did. It was meant to instill fear in those who had terrorized communities for years, demonstrating that there would be no escape from justice. This psychological warfare was just as important as the physical containment of criminals. Knowing that capture meant being sent to CECOT, with no hope of release or influence, served as a deterrent for those still engaged in criminal activities. However, the prison's purpose goes beyond just punishment. Some officials argue that it was built to provide peace of mind to law-abiding citizens. For years, communities lived in fear, uncertain if justice would truly be served. They had seen criminals arrested, only to return to the streets after a few years, more powerful than before. CECOT was meant to change that narrative. It was designed to assure the public that once these individuals were removed from society, they would never return. Yet, with such an extreme approach, debates have emerged regarding the effectiveness of this model. Does permanent isolation solve the root causes of crime, or does it merely remove the symptoms? Is absolute security a guarantee of long-term peace, or does it raise ethical concerns about human rights and justice? Regardless of these debates, one fact remains undeniable: CECOT was built with a clear mission to end the reign of criminal organizations by ensuring their most dangerous members never see the outside world again. The interior of CECOT is designed with one primary goal: total control over inmates. The architecture is stark and utilitarian, built not for comfort but for absolute security and containment. Each section of the facility is heavily monitored, with an emphasis on minimizing movement, communication, and any potential risks of escape or internal unrest. The layout: a fortress within a fortress. The prison cell blocks are long, dimly lit corridors lined with thick metal doors, each leading to a compact cell. The walls are painted in dull, muted colors, reinforcing the institutional and severe nature of the environment. The air is heavy with silence, broken only by the occasional echo of footsteps as guards patrol the halls. Each cell is designed for maximum confinement and minimal interaction. The rooms are small, containing only a metal bunk bed, a stainless steel toilet, and a tiny sink. There are no windows, no personal belongings, and no decoration. Every detail of the space is stripped down to ensure that inmates have nothing beyond the bare essentials. The facility is under constant surveillance. High-definition security cameras are positioned at multiple angles, monitoring every movement inside the cells and corridors. Guards observe the footage in real time from a central control room, ensuring that no activity goes unnoticed. The inmates: total isolation and strict control. Prisoners in CECOT are subjected to strict rules and an extreme level of isolation. There is no social interaction between inmates, as they are confined to their cells for most of the day. Any movement outside their designated areas is highly restricted and always under escort by armed guards. Meals are delivered through a slot in the door, preventing any direct contact between inmates and prison staff. There are no communal areas, eliminating opportunities for prisoners to communicate or plan illicit activities. Physical exercise is limited to small, enclosed areas, where inmates are allowed only brief, monitored sessions under strict supervision. Communication with the outside world is severely restricted. There are no phone calls or visits from family members, except in rare circumstances. Letters and messages are screened, and in many cases, prisoners are kept in total information blackout, ensuring that they cannot relay messages or coordinate criminal activity from behind bars. The guards: maintaining order in an unforgiving environment. The security personnel at CECOT operate with military precision, following strict protocols to prevent any breach of order. The guards are highly trained, equipped with riot gear, and prepared to respond to any situation with swift action. Their presence is constant and imposing, reinforcing the idea that inmates have no control over their environment. Routine head counts occur multiple times a day, ensuring that all prisoners are accounted for at all times. Cells are randomly searched to confiscate any unauthorized items, even though the facility is designed to prevent contraband from entering in the first place. Emergency response teams are on standby at all times in case of disturbances, though the prison's extreme security measures make riots or coordinated resistance nearly impossible. A life of routine and regimentation. Life inside CECOT is entirely structured, leaving inmates with no room for unpredictability or autonomy. The daily routine is repetitive and enforced with military discipline. Wake-up calls occur at the same time every day, with no exceptions. Meals are provided on a strict schedule, always consisting of basic, nutrition-focused portions with no luxuries. Showers and hygiene breaks are timed and monitored, with prisoners given minimal privacy. Lights out is enforced at the same time every evening, ensuring that inmates remain in complete darkness until the next morning. CECOT was designed to be one of the largest and most efficient maximum security prisons in the world, capable of housing an astonishing number of inmates. With a capacity to hold tens of thousands of prisoners, it dwarfs most conventional prison facilities. But its size is not just about numbers. It represents a strategic shift in how law enforcement and the judicial system handle large-scale criminal enterprises. Before CECOT was built, the country's existing prisons were overwhelmed. They were overcrowded, poorly managed, and had effectively turned into criminal headquarters rather than rehabilitation centers. Inmates continued to run operations from behind bars, using smuggled cell phones, corrupt guards, and networks of influence both inside and outside the prison walls. The justice system was trapped in a cycle where arresting criminals only relocated their activities rather than truly dismantling them. Something had to change. The sheer scale of CECOT allowed for a mass incarceration effort unprecedented in modern history. Thousands of suspected and convicted criminals were transferred to this facility in large numbers, often in highly publicized operations. The government aimed to send a clear message. No longer would the prison system be a revolving door for dangerous criminals. Instead, it would be a one-way entry into complete isolation. Inside CECOT, the prison is structured to ensure that no inmate can exert influence, organize, or resist the system in any way. The facility is divided into multiple sectors, each designed to house prisoners in a strictly controlled environment. Unlike many traditional prisons, where inmates can move around freely within certain areas, CECOT enforces a regimented system where movement is highly restricted, monitored, and controlled. Each block is designed with precision, ensuring that no part of the prison can be used for unauthorized activities. There are no common areas where inmates can gather in large numbers. The design minimizes the chances of group coordination, rebellion, or escape attempts. The facility is also built in a way that allows authorities to quickly isolate problem individuals, preventing the formation of power structures within the prison. One of the most critical aspects of CECOT's capacity is its ability to separate different criminal factions. In many prisons around the world, rival gangs continue to operate within the same facilities, leading to internal violence, power struggles, and even murders behind bars. CECOT was specifically designed to eliminate this issue. Inmates are placed in sections that ensure no contact with rival groups, cutting off any potential for power plays or continued criminal alliances. The ability to house thousands of inmates in an environment of complete control also means that law enforcement no longer has to worry about prison riots or gang dominance inside the walls. Many past prison facilities were effectively ruled by criminal leaders who had more power inside than outside. This was a significant issue in previous prisons, where corrupt officials often turned a blind eye or were forced to cooperate with powerful inmates. In CECOT, that power dynamic does not exist. The infrastructure of CECOT is built to handle its massive population efficiently. There are no luxuries, no unnecessary privileges, only the bare minimum required to sustain life under the strictest conditions. The prison operates like a highly regimented machine, where every aspect of an inmate's day is pre-planned and controlled. Meals are provided in a uniform manner, medical care is highly regulated, and any form of communication is strictly monitored or outright prohibited. Another key element of the prison's capacity is its ability to continuously take in more inmates without becoming overcrowded. Overpopulation has been a historical issue in many prison systems, leading to inhumane conditions, increased violence, and operational failures. CECOT was built with this in mind, ensuring that even at full capacity, it maintains a level of order and control that prevents internal breakdowns. This massive capacity has allowed authorities to conduct sweeping operations against crime at an unprecedented scale. Thousands of arrests have been made under new security policies, and instead of worrying about where to place these individuals, CECOT provides a single, centralized facility to contain them all. The government has emphasized that this facility is not just a short-term solution but a long-term strategy to completely dismantle the criminal organizations that once controlled the streets. While supporters see the prison's large capacity as a necessary tool for public safety, critics argue that such large-scale imprisonment raises concerns about due process, wrongful convictions, and the potential for mass incarceration policies to target individuals indiscriminately. Regardless of these debates, what remains clear is that CECOT is more than just a prison. It is a statement of power, control, and a radical approach to crime containment. CECOT is not just any prison. It is the world's most secure facility, designed with the highest level of surveillance, control, and enforcement to ensure that no inmate can escape, communicate with the outside world, or maintain any form of power within its walls. Every aspect of this prison, from its physical construction to its operational protocols, is engineered to prevent riots, breakouts, and unauthorized activity of any kind. At the heart of CECOT's security system is its fortress-like design. The prison is surrounded by multiple layers of reinforced concrete walls, each several meters high and topped with electrified fencing. These walls are built to withstand any potential external force, from attempted break-ins by criminal organizations to natural disasters. The perimeter is heavily guarded at all times, with multiple watchtowers strategically placed to cover every angle of the facility. Each tower is manned by armed personnel equipped with advanced surveillance technology, ensuring that no blind spots exist. Surveillance is one of the most critical components of CECOT's security infrastructure. The entire facility is equipped with thousands of high-definition cameras, motion sensors, and infrared scanning systems. These cameras operate 24/7 and are monitored by security personnel who oversee every movement within the prison. Advanced AI-driven monitoring systems are also in place, capable of detecting unusual behavior patterns that may indicate the planning of an escape attempt, a violent act, or unauthorized communication between inmates. One of the most distinctive features of CECOT is its zero-contact policy. Unlike other prisons where inmates may have limited visitation rights, CECOT enforces total isolation from the outside world. There are no family visits, no phone calls, and no opportunities for inmates to relay messages to their associates beyond the walls. This measure is designed to ensure that criminal leaders cannot continue running their operations from behind bars, a problem that had plagued the country's previous prison system. Inside the prison, inmate movement is strictly controlled. Prisoners are not allowed to roam freely within the facility. Instead, they are moved in tightly controlled groups, always under the watch of armed guards. Even simple tasks like walking from their cells to designated areas for meals or medical checkups are conducted with extreme oversight. Inmates are often restrained during transport, further reducing any possibility of coordinated action. The cells themselves are designed for maximum control. Each cell is built to be escape-proof, with thick steel doors, reinforced locks, and minimal furnishings. The interiors are barren, providing only the absolute necessities, no personal belongings, no distractions, and no ways to communicate with others. The walls are soundproofed to prevent inmates from speaking to one another, effectively cutting off any attempt at organization or rebellion. Another significant security feature is biometric identification and monitoring. Every inmate's movements, medical status, and behavioral patterns are tracked through biometric scanning. Fingerprint and facial recognition technology ensure that every prisoner is accounted for at all times. There is no room for identity manipulation or deception. Even prison staff are subjected to biometric verification to prevent corruption or unauthorized access to restricted areas. The presence of elite tactical units inside CECOT is another major security layer. Unlike ordinary prison guards, these units are highly trained in riot control, hostage situations, and counterterrorism tactics. They are stationed throughout the prison, ready to respond instantly to any disturbance. Their presence alone acts as a deterrent, ensuring that inmates are aware that any attempt at violence or defiance will be met with immediate and overwhelming force. Additionally, CECOT employs strict technological security measures. The prison operates on a fully encrypted internal network, ensuring that no external communication can be established through electronic devices. Signal jamming technology prevents the use of smuggled mobile phones, one of the most common ways criminals continue operating from behind bars. Even the guards' communications are secured with encrypted channels, preventing any possibility of interception or leaks. Medical care and food distribution within CECOT are also handled with extreme security. Meals are provided in a way that minimizes human interaction, reducing the chances of food being used as a medium for smuggling contraband or passing messages. Medical checkups are strictly monitored, and any required procedures take place under direct supervision to ensure that no inmate takes advantage of these moments to manipulate staff or coordinate with others. Beyond physical security, psychological control is also a key component. The prison is designed to break the power structures that criminal organizations typically maintain within correctional facilities. The extreme isolation, lack of communication, and strict routines serve to dismantle any sense of authority or influence that inmates once had. This is a prison where no one holds power except the administration, and every effort is made to ensure that inmates have no means to resist or organize. Despite its already extreme measures, CECOT continues to evolve, constantly upgrading its security protocols to stay ahead of any potential threats. Authorities understand that criminal organizations are always looking for ways to bypass security, so the prison systems are regularly tested, improved, and reinforced. This adaptability is what ensures that CECOT remains not just the most secure prison today, but one that will continue to set the global standard for high-security incarceration. CECOT was built to house the most dangerous and high-profile criminals the country had ever seen. Unlike ordinary prisons, which accommodate a mix of offenders ranging from minor lawbreakers to violent criminals, CECOT exclusively imprisons individuals linked to large-scale organized crime, gang activity, and acts of extreme violence. The facility was designed to ensure that these inmates, who had once terrorized communities, could no longer exert any control or influence, either inside or outside its walls. The vast majority of prisoners at CECOT are members of powerful criminal organizations that have long plagued the country. These groups, known for their brutal tactics, had established dominance over entire cities, extorting businesses, engaging in drug trafficking, and carrying out assassinations with impunity. Many of these criminals were not just street-level offenders, but high-ranking gang leaders, known as ranfleros, who had commanded thousands of followers. Before being incarcerated, they had the power to order kidnappings, murders, and large-scale drug operations from a distance, often without ever needing to step out into the streets themselves. One of the primary reasons for the mass incarceration at CECOT was the sheer scale of violence that these criminals had unleashed upon society. For decades, the country had one of the highest homicide rates in the world, with killings often carried out in the most gruesome and public ways. Rival gang members were executed in broad daylight, civilians were caught in the crossfire, and entire families were displaced due to the constant warfare between criminal factions. The brutality of these groups was not limited to murder. They also engaged in torture, human trafficking, and the forced recruitment of young children into their ranks. The types of crimes committed by CECOT inmates extend beyond just gang-related killings. Many of those housed here were involved in large-scale extortion networks. These criminals would threaten local business owners, demanding money in exchange for protection. Those who refused to pay were often executed, and their businesses were burned to the ground. The fear of these gangs was so deeply ingrained in society that even after arrests were made, victims often refused to testify, knowing that gang leaders could still order killings from behind bars. This is precisely why CECOT was built, to sever that connection completely. Another significant portion of CECOT's inmate population consists of drug traffickers and cartel enforcers. While many of these criminals operated within the country, their influence extended beyond national borders. Some inmates were involved in smuggling large quantities of narcotics across international routes, laundering money, and funding further criminal enterprises. Others acted as enforcers, ensuring that those who interfered with drug operations were swiftly eliminated. The presence of these individuals in CECOT reflects the prison's role in dismantling not just street gangs, but also the deeper financial and logistical networks that fueled organized crime. The prison also houses criminals convicted of kidnapping, armed robbery, and acts of terrorism. Some of the inmates were responsible for orchestrating high-profile abductions, where victims were held for ransom under brutal conditions. Others were involved in large-scale armed assaults, including attacks on police stations and government officials. These were not ordinary criminals. They were men and women who had actively waged war against the state, challenging its authority and threatening national security. One of the key strategies behind sending such criminals to CECOT was to eliminate their ability to maintain influence and recruit new members. In previous prisons, gang leaders often continued to run their organizations from behind bars, passing orders through smuggled phones or corrupt guards. They would coordinate attacks, manage drug deals, and even arrange assassinations with the same level of power they had on the streets. But inside CECOT, all forms of communication are cut off. No visitors, no phone privileges, no ability to send messages to the outside world. The idea was simple. Once these individuals entered CECOT, they ceased to exist as leaders, and their organizations were left vulnerable and disorganized. This level of absolute control is crucial because many of the inmates at CECOT were not just criminals. They were symbols of power within the criminal underworld. They had built reputations that inspired fear and loyalty, and their names carried weight in the streets. To remove them from their networks was to strip them of their influence, making it impossible for them to maintain the structures that had allowed them to thrive for so long. Despite this, the imprisonment of thousands of suspected criminals at CECOT has sparked debates over due process and human rights. Some critics argue that mass incarcerations have led to the wrongful imprisonment of individuals who were not actually involved in organized crime. Given the scale of arrests, there have been concerns about whether every inmate received a fair trial, or if some were swept up in broader crackdowns without sufficient evidence. The government, however, maintains that the overwhelming majority of those imprisoned were active participants in criminal activities, and that their removal from society was necessary to restore peace and security. Beyond the question of guilt, there is also the issue of rehabilitation, or the lack thereof. Traditional prisons often include some form of reintegration programs aimed at reforming inmates and preparing them for eventual release. CECOT, however, does not operate under this model. The prison was built on the principle of permanent incapacitation rather than rehabilitation. There are no educational programs, no vocational training, and no pathways for inmates to transition back into society. The assumption is that those sent to CECOT are beyond reform and that their continued existence in free society would only lead to more crime and suffering. The presence of these criminals in CECOT has had a profound impact on the country's crime rates. In the months following the prison's opening, authorities reported a dramatic drop in violent crime, with homicides reaching historic lows. Entire neighborhoods that were once controlled by gangs saw a return to normalcy, with businesses reopening and citizens feeling safe to walk the streets again. Whether this decline in crime is sustainable in the long term remains a question, but for now, CECOT stands as the ultimate containment facility for the most feared and dangerous individuals the country has ever known. Life inside CECOT is unlike that of any other prison in the world. Designed for absolute control, the daily routine of inmates is rigid, dehumanizing, and leaves no room for individual agency. This facility was not built to rehabilitate or reform criminals. It was built to completely isolate and neutralize them. Every aspect of an inmate's existence within these walls is dictated by an unbreakable structure, ensuring that no opportunities for rebellion, communication, or resistance arise. One of the most defining aspects of life in CECOT is the extreme isolation. Unlike traditional prisons, where inmates can socialize, work, or even participate in recreational activities, CECOT enforces a near-total ban on interaction. Prisoners do not have access to televisions, radios, or any form of external media. There are no educational or rehabilitation programs, no religious services, and no visits from family members. The world outside ceases to exist the moment an inmate enters. Daily routine and restrictions. Each day at CECOT follows the same strict schedule, designed to keep inmates in a constant state of subjugation and obedience. Morning procedures. The day begins early. Guards enter the cells, often shouting orders for prisoners to wake up immediately. There is no alarm clock, no gentle transition from sleep, just the sharp, commanding presence of heavily armed officers. Cells are open one by one, and inmates are lined up in strict formation. They are not allowed to speak, look around, or make any sudden movements. Any sign of defiance is met with immediate and severe punishment. Once assembled, they are marched, sometimes shackled, toward their designated areas. Unlike in other prisons where inmates might eat together in a communal cafeteria, meals at CECOT are distributed in strictly controlled environments, often inside the cells themselves. This prevents prisoners from interacting or forming alliances. Meals, basic survival, no comfort. Food inside CECOT is intentionally basic and unappealing. There are no special dietary accommodations, no luxury items, just the bare minimum required to sustain life. The government has made it clear that this prison is about punishment and containment, not comfort. Meals are served at the same time each day, with no variety or personalization. Nutritional needs are met, but there is no excess, just enough calories to prevent malnutrition. This is another layer of psychological control. Inmates are stripped of the ability to choose anything about their lives, including what they eat, exercise, and movement. One of the only times inmates leave their cells is for brief, heavily monitored exercise sessions. Even then, they are not allowed to interact freely. The prison's design ensures that no group dynamics can form. Each inmate is a lone entity, moving under the watchful eyes of armed guards. Exercise areas are often stark, empty spaces with little more than concrete walls and a hard floor. There are no gym facilities, no recreational areas, just enough room to move under strict supervision. Sessions are short, and any sign of aggression or disobedience results in immediate punishment. Cell conditions: extreme isolation. Prisoners spend the majority of their time locked in their cells, which are designed to eliminate all comfort and privacy. No furniture beyond a metal bed and toilet. There are no personal belongings, no mattresses beyond the bare minimum. No windows to the outside world. Inmates have no sense of time, weather, or life beyond their confinement. Soundproof walls. This prevents communication between prisoners, cutting off any potential for organizing resistance. Harsh lighting conditions. Cells are either kept under permanent artificial lighting or subjected to sudden darkness, disrupting any sense of routine or comfort. This extreme isolation has a psychological effect on inmates. With no human interaction, no entertainment, and no distractions, prisoners lose their sense of identity and control. This is not an accident. CECOT was built to break the power of criminal leaders, ensuring that they cannot maintain influence or authority even within the prison system. Discipline and punishment. CECOT has zero tolerance for defiance. Any sign of disobedience is met with immediate disciplinary action. Guards are always armed and ready to intervene. Unlike traditional prisons where officers may use non-lethal force, CECOT's security personnel operate under a much stricter protocol. They carry weapons at all times and have full authority to use them if necessary. Any sign of resistance results in isolation. Inmates who attempt to defy orders, communicate with others, or resist in any way are immediately placed in solitary confinement, cells that are even smaller and harsher than the standard units. Physical discipline is routine. Guards maintain total control through intimidation, physical restraint, and immediate suppression of any potential unrest. There are no appeals, no leniency, and no second chances. CECOT is designed to be the final stop for the most dangerous criminals, and its rules reflect that reality. Medical care. Minimal and strictly controlled. While CECOT does provide basic medical care, it is far from humane. The prison is legally required to keep inmates alive, but the standard of health care is minimal. Medical checkups are done under strict security. Inmates are shackled even during examinations to prevent any chance of escape or aggression. Only emergency treatment is given. There are no advanced procedures, no elective surgeries, and no mental health support. Psychological breakdowns are ignored. With such extreme isolation, many inmates suffer from severe mental deterioration, but therapy or rehabilitation is not provided. The system views their suffering as part of the punishment. No communication with the outside world. CECOT enforces a total blackout on external contact. Inmates have no access to phone calls, letters, or visits. Unlike in other prisons, where families can maintain some connection with their loved ones, CECOT completely severs these ties. No family visits, even close relatives, are denied access. No mail or messages. Any attempt to send or receive correspondence is blocked. No lawyer communication beyond official court matters. Inmates cannot manipulate the legal system to send messages to their associates. This ensures that criminal leaders inside CECOT are permanently cut off from their organizations. They cannot issue orders, receive updates, or participate in any external activity. Psychological impact: a life without hope. The effect of CECOT's extreme conditions is devastating on inmates. With no interaction, no external communication, and no future prospects, prisoners gradually lose their sense of identity and purpose. Power structures are dismantled. Criminal leaders who once commanded thousands of followers find themselves powerless, alone, and forgotten. Mental deterioration is inevitable. Many inmates suffer from severe anxiety, depression, and paranoia due to the relentless isolation. There is no path to redemption. Unlike other prisons where inmates may work toward parole or reintegration, CECOT offers no second chances, only permanent containment. The government views this as a necessary price to pay for national security. By ensuring that these criminals can never return to society, authorities believe they have effectively ended decades of terror, violence, and organized crime. While CECOT has been praised by some for its role in reducing crime and dismantling gang structures, it has also been heavily criticized on multiple fronts. Human rights organizations, legal experts, and international observers have raised serious concerns about the conditions within the facility, the legality of mass incarcerations, and the overall treatment of inmates. The prison has become a symbol of absolute state control, but at what cost? Mass incarceration and due process concerns. One of the biggest controversies surrounding CECOT is the mass incarceration of thousands of individuals, many of whom were arrested without formal charges or trials. In an unprecedented crackdown, tens of thousands of people were swept up in police raids and transferred to the facility without going through standard judicial procedures. Arrests were made based on suspicion rather than evidence. Many detainees were reportedly taken into custody simply for having tattoos associated with gangs, living in certain neighborhoods, or being related to known gang members. Legal representation was limited. Many of those arrested had little to no access to lawyers, and their cases were often processed in secret. This raises significant concerns about wrongful imprisonment. Trials, when held, were rushed and lacked transparency. Judges often approved mass convictions, sentencing hundreds at a time in a system that seemed more focused on efficiency than justice. International human rights organizations have pointed out that due process is a fundamental right and that even those accused of crimes deserve a fair trial. By prioritizing mass incarceration over legal fairness, critics argue that the government may have trapped innocent individuals within CECOT's walls. Prison conditions and allegations of torture. The harsh conditions inside CECOT have also come under intense scrutiny. While the government argues that extreme measures are necessary to contain the most dangerous criminals, human rights activists claim that the facility violates basic standards of humane treatment. Extreme isolation. Inmates are cut off from all human interaction. Many prisoners are held in their cells for nearly 24 hours a day, with no social contact, no access to fresh air, and no mental stimulation. Psychological torture is a concern. Long-term isolation has been known to cause severe mental illness, including depression, paranoia, and suicidal thoughts. Physical abuse allegations. Guards reportedly use excessive force. There have been multiple reports of beatings, arbitrary punishments, and physical mistreatment. Food and water deprivation tactics. Some former inmates claim that food is deliberately kept at starvation levels to weaken prisoners and make them more compliant. Harsh disciplinary measures. Any form of defiance can result in solitary confinement or other physical punishments. Lack of medical care and humanitarian support. CECOT provides only the most basic medical services, and even these are heavily restricted. Human rights organizations argue that this neglect is a form of institutional abuse. Limited access to healthcare. Inmates suffering from chronic illnesses, infections, or injuries receive minimal treatment, often only when their conditions become life-threatening. No mental health support. Many prisoners develop severe psychological disorders due to isolation, yet the prison does not provide therapy or psychiatric care. Reports of deaths in custody. There have been claims that prisoners have died due to medical neglect, malnutrition, or untreated injuries. Collective punishment, and the question of rehabilitation. Another major criticism of CECOT is that it does not distinguish between levels of criminal involvement. Low-level offenders are treated the same as gang leaders. Some inmates were likely coerced into joining gangs due to poverty or threats, but are now being held under the same extreme conditions as career criminals. No rehabilitation programs exist. There are no vocational training programs, no education initiatives, and no reintegration efforts. The assumption is that all inmates are beyond redemption, leading to a system focused solely on punishment. Legal experts argue that not every person in CECOT deserves a life sentence in what is essentially a high-tech dungeon. The lack of rehabilitation efforts means that if any inmates are eventually released, they will likely be even more broken and dangerous than before. Secrecy and lack of oversight. Another troubling aspect of CECOT is the lack of transparency. The government has been highly secretive about what happens inside the prison, making independent monitoring difficult. Journalists and human rights groups are denied access. The government controls all images and reports coming out of the prison, meaning the outside world only sees what officials want them to see. No independent inspections. Unlike other prisons where human rights organizations can conduct inspections, CECOT operates in near total secrecy. Fear of retaliation. Former guards and inmates who speak out about abuses risk government retaliation or legal consequences. This secrecy raises major concerns about what is happening behind closed doors. If the prison is as well-run and effective as the government claims, why not allow independent oversight? Political motivations and potential for abuse. Some critics argue that CECOT is not just about fighting crime, it is also a political tool. Mass arrests have increased government popularity. By imprisoning tens of thousands of suspected criminals, leaders can claim victory in the fight against gangs. Opposition voices are at risk. There are concerns that the government could use CECOT as a way to silence political dissent by labeling opponents as criminals. The potential for corruption. With so many arrests happening so quickly, there is a risk that law enforcement officials could abuse their power for personal gain, arresting individuals based on bribes or political motivations. International backlash and legal challenges. CECOT has drawn attention from international human rights organizations, the United Nations, and foreign governments. Some key concerns include potential violations of international human rights laws, the use of mass incarceration, lack of due process, and inhumane conditions could put the country in conflict with treaties and agreements it has signed. Legal challenges in international courts. Some activists are pushing for legal action in global human rights courts to investigate conditions at CECOT. Diplomatic consequences. Foreign governments that prioritize human rights may impose sanctions or restrict aid if abuses are confirmed. Despite these controversies, the government maintains that CECOT is a necessary tool for maintaining national security and breaking the cycle of gang violence. However, the debate continues over whether its methods are justified or if they represent an unacceptable erosion of justice and human rights. The creation of CECOT was driven by the need to combat unprecedented levels of gang violence that had plagued the country for decades. Before its construction, crime rates, particularly homicides, extortion, and kidnappings, were among the highest in the world. Entire communities lived under the control of gangs, who dictated daily life through intimidation, forced recruitment, and brutal killings. In the months and years following CECOT's opening, the government has touted record-breaking drops in crime rates. Officials claim that violent crime, especially homicides, has plummeted, and for the first time in decades, people can walk the streets without fear. But while some hail the prison as a symbol of victory over organized crime, others question whether the results are sustainable, or if the apparent success is masking deeper social and legal issues. Dramatic reduction in crime rates. The government has reported a historic decline in homicides and gang-related crime since the implementation of mass arrests and the opening of CECOT. Some key figures include: homicide rates have dropped to record lows. Once considered one of the most violent countries in the world, authorities claim that the murder rate has fallen dramatically. Extortion networks have been dismantled. Before the crackdown, thousands of businesses were forced to pay protection fees to gangs. With the incarceration of gang leaders, these extortion operations have significantly decreased. Public spaces, once controlled by gangs, have been reclaimed. Neighborhoods that were previously too dangerous to enter are now experiencing a resurgence of economic and social activity. These changes have been widely publicized, with the government using them as proof that CECOT is an essential tool in the fight against crime. Supporters argue that by isolating thousands of dangerous criminals in one highly secure location, authorities have effectively crippled the country's largest criminal organizations. Fear and deterrence, a psychological shift. Beyond the tangible crime statistics, CECOT has had a significant psychological impact on both criminals and the general public. Gangs now fear the consequences of being caught. Before, many criminals operated with near impunity. They knew that even if they were arrested, they could continue their operations from inside prison. With CECOT's total isolation policies, gang leaders can no longer issue orders, making recruitment and organization much more difficult. The image of the all-powerful gang member is fading. For years, gangs ruled through fear and reputation. Their ability to intimidate communities came from the belief that they were untouchable. Now, with thousands of gang members locked away under some of the harshest conditions in the world, that aura of invincibility has been shattered. Potential recruits are thinking twice. In the past, joining a gang was seen as a means of survival or a way to gain power. But now, with CECOT looming as a potential fate, many young people are reconsidering their choices. The government hopes that this will cut off the supply of new gang members, leading to a generational decline in organized crime. Public support. A divided opinion. CECOT has polarized public opinion, with some citizens strongly supporting it while others raise concerns about human rights and long-term consequences. Strong support from citizens affected by crime. For many people who lived under gang rule for decades, CECOT represents justice and security. Communities, once controlled by gangs, now feel safe. Many residents who were once afraid to leave their homes at night now report feeling secure. Businesses can operate without fear of extortion. Local entrepreneurs and shop owners, who once had to pay daily fees to gang members, can now function freely. Victims of gang violence see this as long overdue justice. Families who lost loved ones to gang killings often support harsh measures against criminals. For these individuals, CECOT is not just a prison. It is a symbol of a turning point in the fight against crime. Many believe that the harsh conditions within the prison are justified, considering the terror that gangs inflicted on society for years. Concerns from human rights advocates and legal experts. On the other hand, human rights organizations, legal experts, and some members of civil society have expressed serious concerns about how the crackdown has been implemented. Mass arrests raise questions about wrongful imprisonment. With thousands of people detained, some innocent individuals may have been caught up in the sweep. There is no path to rehabilitation. Critics argue that simply locking criminals away in harsh conditions without any effort at reform may lead to long-term problems once these individuals are eventually released. Authoritarianism concerns. Some fear that the success of CECOT could encourage future leaders to adopt even more extreme measures, leading to an erosion of civil liberties. These critics argue that reducing crime is important, but not at the cost of justice and due process. While CECOT has undoubtedly led to a decline in violence, they question whether the ends justify the means. Long-term questions. Is this a permanent solution? While CECOT has had a clear impact on reducing gang activity in the short term, experts are debating whether it is a sustainable solution in the long run. Some key questions include: what happens if CECOT reaches maximum capacity? The government cannot keep arresting people indefinitely. Eventually, the prison will fill up, and authorities will need to decide how to handle new criminals. Will crime adapt? While mass incarcerations have weakened existing gangs, there is concern that new criminal organizations could emerge with different tactics. How will future governments handle crime policy? If a new administration takes over, will they continue the same approach, or will they face pressure to change the system? While supporters believe that CECOT has permanently weakened criminal organizations, skeptics worry that it treats the symptoms rather than the root causes of crime, such as poverty, lack of education, and unemployment. If these underlying issues are not addressed, there is a risk that criminal activity could return in different forms. The creation of CECOT and the government's aggressive anti-crime policies have had far-reaching economic and social consequences, some of which were anticipated, while others emerged as unintended side effects. While supporters argue that a safer country leads to stronger economic growth and social stability, critics warn that the costs, both financial and societal, may be too high in the long run. Economic impact, a safer nation, but at what cost? One of the most immediate economic benefits of CECOT and the mass incarceration of gang members has been the revitalization of businesses that were previously suffocated by extortion and violence. For years, gangs operated extensive extortion networks, forcing local businesses, taxi drivers, market vendors, and even multinational corporations to pay monthly protection fees. This criminal tax drained millions from the economy, stifled entrepreneurship, and deterred foreign investment. With gang extortion reduced, businesses are finally thriving. Small businesses that once had to set aside a portion of their income to pay gangs now keep their profits, leading to economic expansion in previously crime-ridden areas. Foreign investment has increased. Companies that once hesitated to establish operations in the country due to high crime rates are now reconsidering, seeing the country as a safer and more stable place to do business. Tourism is making a comeback. Once labeled one of the most dangerous countries in the world, the country has seen a resurgence in international tourism as visitors no longer fear being caught in gang crossfire. However, while these benefits are widely celebrated, there are also significant costs associated with maintaining CECOT and the broader security strategy. Mass incarceration is extremely expensive. Housing, feeding, and monitoring tens of thousands of inmates in a maximum security environment requires massive financial resources, which are drawn from taxpayers. The prison system is absorbing public funds that could be used elsewhere. Some critics argue that education, healthcare, and social programs are being underfunded in order to sustain CECOT's operating costs. Heavy-handed security measures discourage certain businesses. While foreign corporations value security, some businesses, particularly those in creative industries, journalism, and civil society, fear that the government's approach is too authoritarian, creating an environment where freedom of expression is at risk. The impact on families and communities. The rapid expansion of CECOT has torn apart thousands of families, many of whom were already struggling with poverty and instability. The government's zero-tolerance policy has led to mass arrests, often sweeping up young men who may not have been active gang members, but were suspected due to their associations, appearance, or place of residence. Children are growing up without fathers, brothers, or uncles. With tens of thousands of men imprisoned, many families have been left without breadwinners, increasing economic hardship for their loved ones. Women bear the brunt of economic survival. With men removed from households, women, particularly in working-class communities, are left to support their families alone, often turning to informal or low-paying jobs. Some arrests have created resentment rather than relief. While many citizens support the crackdown on gangs, others feel that their communities have been unfairly targeted, creating tension between the government and certain marginalized groups. Long-term social consequences. A new generation at risk? While the government's security strategy has weakened gang structures, it has not necessarily addressed the root causes of crime. Many of the social conditions that allowed gangs to thrive in the first place, poverty, lack of education, and limited job opportunities, still exist. Thousands of children are now growing up in fractured families. With so many fathers and older brothers in prison, a generation of youth is being raised in single-parent households, increasing their vulnerability to economic hardship and social instability. The fear of wrongful imprisonment has pushed some families into exile. Some individuals who fear being falsely accused of gang affiliation have chosen to leave the country, creating a small but growing wave of migration. Reintegration of prisoners will be a major challenge. If, in the future, some inmates are released due to overcrowding or policy shifts, they will return to society without rehabilitation, education, or work skills, making their reintegration extremely difficult. A society deeply divided. CECOT has polarized public opinion, creating a deep divide between those who see it as a necessary tool for security and those who believe it has created a humanitarian crisis. For some, CECOT is proof that the government is serious about eliminating crime. They argue that the economic and social benefits of safer streets, thriving businesses, and the dismantling of gangs outweigh any downsides. For others, the prison represents a dangerous shift toward authoritarianism. They worry that the government's willingness to suspend human rights in the name of security sets a precedent that could be abused in the future. This divide is not just ideological, it is also generational and class-based. Wealthier citizens, who were less likely to be affected by mass arrests, tend to support the government's approach. Meanwhile, poorer communities, which have seen the largest numbers of people detained, often have mixed feelings, with some celebrating the removal of gang members and others fearing that innocent people have been unjustly imprisoned. CECOT is not just a prison. It is an experiment in extreme security measures, a symbol of a government's unwavering commitment to eradicating gang violence, and a warning to criminals that their reign of terror is over. However, as time passes, the future of this facility and the broader security strategy it represents remains uncertain. Will CECOT be remembered as the turning point that saved a nation from crime, or will it become a case study in the dangers of mass incarceration and authoritarian control? The sustainability of mass incarceration. One of the biggest questions surrounding CECOT is whether it is a long-term solution or a temporary fix. The prison was built to house up to 40,000 inmates, and it has already filled a significant portion of that capacity. But the government's aggressive crackdown on crime shows no signs of slowing down, raising several challenges. What happens when CECOT reaches full capacity? If arrests continue at the current rate, the government will face difficult decisions. Will new prisons be built? Will sentences be reviewed? Or will overcrowding force officials to release inmates before their sentences are complete? Can the prison system handle long-term incarceration at this scale? The cost of maintaining tens of thousands of high-security prisoners is enormous. As time goes on, the financial burden on the government will only grow. How will future administrations handle the legacy of CECOT? While the current leadership is committed to maintaining a hardline stance on crime, future governments may face pressure to adopt more balanced policies that include rehabilitation and reintegration programs. If CECOT is to remain a permanent fixture of the justice system, its long-term viability must be carefully planned. Otherwise, it risks becoming another overcrowded and dysfunctional prison, no different from the facilities it was meant to replace. The risk of evolving criminal networks. While CECOT has undoubtedly weakened existing gangs, history shows that criminal organizations are adaptive. When one method of operation becomes impossible, they evolve and find new ways to survive. Some potential risks include the rise of new gangs or criminal factions. With the leadership of traditional gangs imprisoned, younger and more unpredictable criminals may step up to fill the power vacuum, potentially leading to more fragmented and violent crime. A shift to cybercrime and white-collar crime. As physical gang operations become impossible, criminals may move toward less visible forms of crime, such as online fraud, money laundering, or drug trafficking through legal businesses. Criminal networks operating from outside the country. Some gang leaders who managed to evade capture have fled to neighboring CECOT stands as one of the most ambitious and controversial security projects in modern history. It has undeniably reshaped the landscape of crime, striking fear into criminal organizations and restoring a sense of security to communities long terrorized by gangs. For many, it represents a long overdue reckoning, a demonstration of state power against those who once ruled through violence and intimidation. However, its long-term success will not be measured solely by the number of inmates behind bars, but by whether it can truly dismantle the root causes of crime: poverty, lack of education, and social inequality. If CECOT becomes just another overcrowded prison, filled with individuals who have no chance of rehabilitation, it risks creating a cycle of incarceration rather than a lasting peace. The world is watching. Some governments see CECOT as a potential model for dealing with crime, while others warn of the dangers of sacrificing justice and human rights in the name of security. The real test will come in the years ahead, when the government must decide whether its war on crime will be fought only with prisons, or if it will also invest in creating